right. Check, check. Okay. Okay, can everybody hear my voice?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so I think we can start now. So, selamat siang Ibu Bapak. Salam dari Salatiga Indonesia. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are now. Greetings from Salatiga Indonesia. So, welcome to our webinar series on ELT and beyond, proudly presented by Master's and Bachelor's Program in English Language Education, Faculty of Language and Arts, Satya Wacana Christian University, Indonesia. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Calvin, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar on critical thinking in the language classroom. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Kamidi, could you please display the slide on the housekeeping? All right. So this session is being recorded for information, and then please personalize your name, and if necessary, you may add your pronouns. And then later on, all of you will be muted, and then if possible, please turn on your video. Then for information, the question and answer session will be done after each of the speakers' presentations. And you may use raise hand function to signal your wish to speak during the Q&A sessions. And you may also use the chat box to ask questions to our presenters for today. And now I would like to invite Dr. Deborah Triragawanti, the head of the master's program, to give the opening remarks and officially open this webinar. Dr. Ragawanti, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Calvin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's webinar on critical thinking in the language classroom. It is a privilege for us to have a great number of audiences from around the globe. So thank you very much for joining our webinar today. And it is also a privilege for us to have three esteemed speakers in this webinar, Dr. Willy Renandya, Dr. Daisy Tan, and Professor Joseph Ernest Mambu. Thank you very much, Pak Willy, Miss Daisy, and Pak Joseph for taking the time to share your expertise and insight with us. Yeah, for your information, you are currently attending the first session of the webinar series hosted by the Master's and Bachelor's programs in English Language Education at the Faculty of Language and Arts, Satya Wacana Christian University, Indonesia. A little bit about us. In our faculty, we have Bachelor programs in English Language Education, English Letters, and Music and Performance Arts. And we've also got an MA program in English Language Education. In the field of English Language Education, we are very committed in the continuous academic and professional development of both students and teachers. So if you are interested in exploring more about our study programs, you can visit our website at www.uksw.edu. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. And I do hope you enjoyed the presentations that will be delivered by our three esteemed speakers. And we hope to see you again at the next webinar conducted on September the 16th with the topic, Can Technology Enhance Learning? Again, thank you. And back to you, Pak Calvin.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ragawanti, for the opening remarks. And now I think without further ado, I will turn the time to Dr. Willy Renandya, our first speaker for today. I think everybody knows Pak Willy, but let me introduce him to you all for brief. Okay. So Dr. Willy Renandya is a language teacher educator with extensive teaching experience in Asia. I think not only in Asia, but also around the world. So he currently teaches applied linguistics courses at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And he has given more than 100 keynote presentations at international ELT conferences and has published extensively in the area of second language education. And his publications include Language Teaching Methodology, an anthology of current practice, published in 2002 by Cambridge University Press, and Student-Centered Cooperative Learning in 2019, 2019 by Springer International. And he maintains a large teacher professional development forum called Teacher Voices that I think everybody here, most of you are familiar with. And he has a website called Willy's ELT Corner that, to the best of my observation, discusses many recent issues on ELT and also provides us with many valuable tips, especially for language teachers and educators. So I think, Dr. Renandia, the screen is now yours. And for information,
Yes.
you have 25 minutes to present, yeah, Pak Willy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pak Calvin, if you could ask the participants to turn on the video camera very briefly, just for 10 seconds, so that I can say hello to them. Pak.
Yeah, everybody. Okay, everybody, could you please turn on
very
the
briefly.
video just for 10 seconds so that Pak Willy
can... 10 seconds so that I can say hello to you.
Yeah.
And also, maybe I can also greet you in your language. Magandang umaga if you're from the Philippines. And selamat, magandang umaga is selamat is morning. This is afternoon. I haven't learned that word yet. I think there are people from China, from Vietnam, and also from other places as well. Please have your camera on throughout if you can, so that I can look at you and I can ask you questions as well during my presentation. Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, just very briefly, this is my university. The name of the university is Nanyang Technological University, and I work at the School of Education, locally known as the National Institute of Education. Just for those of you from Indonesia, my university and my Institute of Education is one of the few LPDP and BPI approved university. If you are trying to get a scholarship from the Indonesian government, I think you may just be able to consider applying for admission into my university. Okay, my topic today, just give me 1 second. I can't seem to see you on my screen. I wonder why. Let me just try again. When I have my slides on, all of you disappeared from my screen. Let me try one more time, see if I can see you now. Okay, just give me 1 second. Oh, you're gone again. I wonder why. Okay, anyway, I have 3 things that I want to share with you. The first one is I will briefly talk about why reading is important and why reading can be an excellent way for you to teach critical thinking skills to your students. But first off, I will talk about the benefits of reading and why reading is important for your students' language development and also for your students' overall literacy development. And then point number 2, I will talk a little bit about, what actually reading involves in terms of helping students develop their linguistic processes, also known as lower order processes, and also how reading is associated with higher order thinking processes. So in terms of reading, we are talking about 2 things. Number 1 is lower, order thinking processes and higher order thinking processes. It's the higher order thinking processes that are very important if we are serious in teaching our students how to think more critically when they read or when they listen to presentation by people. And point number 3, now this is the most important part, but also the most difficult part for us to appreciate. You know, research tells us actually that teaching critical thinking is really hard work. It's not easy to teach critical thinking, and more importantly, it's really difficult for us to help our students become more critical thinkers. And we'll discuss this in greater details in my presentation. So bear with me. First off, let me just very briefly mention or point out some of the most important benefits of reading. In other words, why reading is good for you, why reading is good for your family, why reading is good for your children or for your students in school. I have some here on my screen, and I'm sure you can relate to these benefits quite readily. Point number 1, reading is enjoyable, it's relaxing. If you're having a difficult day, maybe reading can be a stress buster for you. I think you can be more relaxed when you read, a good novel, at home. In addition to that, research also tells us that reading can increase your linguistic knowledge, your word power tremendously. Students who read a great deal actually develop their vocabulary knowledge, and they can then make use of this knowledge in order for them to read more, to understand more, and to be able to make sense of information that they read in their reading materials in school, or maybe in their independent reading as well. The next point is this, that reading is important in increasing your knowledge base. And later, I will keep on repeating this, that knowledge is so fundamental that without a very strong knowledge base, it's extremely difficult for you to teach critical thinking skills to your students. And you may have seen somewhere that reading also can improve your soft skills, because you know a lot of things, a lot of places, a lot of historical facts, a lot of places. When you have a conversation with people, I think you can engage them in a very interesting discussion about issues related to the economic situations, the political situations, and other things related to life and also to education. Most important, perhaps for many of us in the audience, is this, that reading, doing a lot of reading, reading on a regular basis, reading daily over time can actually improve students' academic achievement in school. Their literacy scores will go up, and also their ability to comprehend information becomes much, much better. Let me show you some empirical evidence. Time and again, I think this graph represents what people understand about the relationship between socioeconomic status and reading achievement. Children coming from lower socioeconomic status tend to have low reading achievement. On the other hand, children coming from high socioeconomic status or middle socioeconomic status tend to score high on reading tests. So this is one important piece of fact that we have learned from research. We also know this. Now, this is another important point that we need to remember, that students who spend a lot of time reading also tend to become better in their reading scores. And this achievement in reading scores get translated into higher performance in the school situations or in the school context. Now, here is what happens if we put these two graphs together, and you will see something really, really magical. But keep in mind that socioeconomic status is a key factor influencing students' reading achievement. And point number 2, reading engagement is a key factor also in influencing students' reading or literacy achievement. Here is what happened if you put them together. Now, this graph is a little bit complicated, but what I'm going to show you, highlight to you, is this. Look at the white box on the right-hand side. That is the performance of students coming from the lower socioeconomic status. And compare that with students who are from higher economic status, but they don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of reading. So you can see here that socioeconomic status, which is a very powerful factor in influencing students' reading achievement, can be sort of negated, if and only if students are given a lot of opportunities to do a lot of reading. So the key message here is that reading is good. Doing a lot of reading is very, very good. And if you do that, chances are very high that students, even those coming from the socioeconomic status, the low socioeconomic status, might be able to do well in school and improving their literacy scores. Very important for places like Indonesia, for example, where students' literacy score tends to be very low. And one of the reasons is that they don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of reading. In my next presentation, the next part, I'll be looking more deeply at two types of processes that are involved in reading, which I would call the lower order thinking processes and the higher order thinking processes. Here is what we have learned from research. So point number one to remember is this, that reading is a linguistic process. Yeah, reading is a process of recognizing words. Reading is a process of reading group of words together so that you are reading not word by word, but you'll be reading, in a phrase group or in a clause group. Reading is also about reading the whole text, not just reading a sentence, not just reading a paragraph, but also reading the whole story. So in that sense, reading is known as a linguistic process. Language is the most important criterion here. Yeah. And students will have to do this fairly quickly so that they become very good at recognizing the words. They become very good at reading at the sentence level. They will become very efficient at reading at the text level. But this is going to take quite a bit of time, especially for those who are not used to doing a lot of reading. And this can take quite a bit of time for them to develop. Yeah. So the question is, what does research tell us about how these processes can be, done quickly, efficiently, and effortlessly? Usually, the process involves 3 stages. The first part is attending, understanding, knowing what the word is and how the words combine with other words in a sentence or in a clause, and how these sentences then form a paragraph and the whole story. The first part involves attending or paying attention. The second part involves doing, practice, proceduralizing what you have just learned in the first step. But the next part, which takes a lot of time, is known as automatizing. You have to do it so often that you become very good at it, so that you can do it without thinking. You can do it effortlessly. So this essentially is what is involved in the very first process of developing linguistic processes in reading. I think that is pretty straightforward, yeah? Now, the second part that we need to understand is this. Reading is also a comprehension process. Yeah, but the word comprehension is often misunderstood, because one of the meaning of comprehension actually is this, that reading is a meaning-making process. What I'm saying here is that meaning is not always in the text. Meaning is in the text, but meaning is also in your head or in your student's head. And that is what meaning-making process actually means. Yeah, in a very simple sentence, in order for you to get meaning from the text, in order for your students to get meaning from the text, they will need to bring meaning into it. Let me just give you an example. Yeah. Daisy, are you still there? Oh, Bu Deborah, are you still there? Bu Deborah? Bu Deborah, are you still there? Okay, here is a conversation between a teacher and a student, and the student's name happened to be Ibu Deborah. Deborah, if you have $5 and you ask your mom to give you another $5, how many dollars would you have? Deborah, are you still there? And Deborah says, $5, no more, no less. And the teacher says, you don't know your maths. Deborah says, you don't know my mom. If you understand this, that means that you are making use of what you know in your head in order for you to make sense of what is happening in this anecdote or in this small humorous text. Yeah, so again, meaning is in the text, but meaning is also in the head. Here is another example. Now, this one is for Pak Agus. Pak Agus Santoso is from Jakarta. How come you fail your grammar tests? And Agus says to the father, absent, Dad. And the dad then continues, you were absent on the test day? Oh, no, Dad. So what's the problem? So it's the girl who sits next to me. She was absent on that day. Now, if you laugh at this, that means that you understand, the hidden meaning or the meaning that is not mentioned in the text, but you still was able to understand this because you were able to add meaning into the text. I hope I'm making sense there. So reading is a meaning-making process. It's in the text, but it's also in your head. Another important point, now this is also related to how we develop our deeper understanding of a piece of text, but we can also learn to be a bit more critical when we read a piece of information from a text. So what we have here is that reading is a group meaning-making process. Yes, reading alone is good, but reading with a group of people, reading and then talking about what you have read and discussing it with other people can further enhance the meaning-making process. In other words, your understanding will become more enhanced and more nuanced, perhaps, and more extended. Yeah, so reading with others can help you understand things at a much more deeper level. So meaning is not just in the text, meaning is in your head, but meaning is also in other people's heads. And if you make use of this, chances are very high that you'll be able to understand the text at a much deeper level, and perhaps helping you to see things from a different perspectives, from a different angle. And that is one of the features of somebody who is critical in their reading. Another important process that we need to appreciate is this, that reading is a purposeful process. Yeah. There has to be a certain purpose why a piece of text is written. Yeah. What is the reason why a text is written, and who wrote the text, for which audience, and in what particular context? Now, these things are not usually communicated to the students in the classroom. Yeah. So typically in the classroom context, we are more concerned with teaching vocabulary, teaching grammar, maybe teaching reading skills and strategies. And most important, perhaps for most teachers, is to help the students to answer comprehension questions. Yeah. But we do know that text, a piece of text, are always socially constructed. Yeah. There's a purpose. It's to inform, to persuade, or maybe to mislead you. With social media today, I think you will be able to see a lot of examples of how people, purposefully try to mislead you into believing that something is good when it is actually not a very good thing. The audience, yeah, who is the audience for the text? Is it the general audience? Is it people in education, people in business, lower or middle income group of people, and so on and so forth? Understanding this will help our students become more careful and more discerning in their reading, and more critical as well. And finally, the context. Yeah, is it in the classroom? Is it outside the classroom? Is it at home? Is it something that is written in a newspaper or in other context? And finally, the social media just makes things really, really difficult for us, for our students, for that matter, to become critical and discerning in their reading. One of the reasons is that social media is free. People can write about anything. There is no screening. There's nobody screening or editing what you are going to put in your social media. And that makes critical thinking even more important. Again, but the key thing here is I think we need to teach our students that, a text is not neutral. A text is socially constructed. A text is very often ideologically laden with, important messages and sometimes misleading messages that the author is trying to say, communicate to the readers. If I were to show you this piece of text, how would you judge this piece of text? Is it trustworthy? Is it, factual? Is it informative? Is what you see there is what you get if you buy this drink? Pak Josh, are you there? Can you use a microphone, Pak Josh?
Yes.
Very good. Finally, I can hear some voice because I can't see your foot. I can't see your picture on my screen. I don't know why suddenly all of this disappeared. But Josh, yes, if you see something like this, yeah, keeping in mind that, a piece of text like this is produced for a specific purpose, for a specific audience, for a specific context. And because of that, the language that is used is also very special, right? So how do we take this? How do we make sense of this? Very tricky, yeah?
Yeah, very tricky.
Very tricky, because the purpose here is for the audience, for the potential customers to get, a bottle of this drink. Yeah, whether or not this drink actually is useful and has a lot of vitamins in it is another issue. Yeah, but the purpose is for people to be interested and to buy this drink. Now, if I were to show you a website like this, but Josh, back to you. I'm very happy to hear your voice. If I were to show you a text like this is taken from a website actually. It's about 3 octopus. If you look at the format, the language that is used there, yeah, and the academic language that is used, I think you will get the impression that this is legitimate, this is authentic, right? Mm-hmm. But in reality, there's nothing like a tree octopus. Octopus does not live on trees, But if you're not very careful, and when you read this, without understanding, the reason behind this, I think it's very easy for you to fall into believing that this is a very good piece of information. Yeah. Okay. Next point about reading. We're still into reading here. That reading is a proficiency building process. Very important for those of you in the audience. If you teach students of weaker, lower proficiency, research tells us very clearly that reading is a great source of language input, and reading is a proficiency booster. And what it means essentially is that students who read a great deal also develop higher level of English language proficiency in terms of reading, in terms of speaking, writing, and vocabulary and grammar as well. Yeah. So these are some instances of references that you might want to look at if you want to be more convinced about how reading can develop your students' proficiency in the English language, or even in Bahasa Indonesia, or whatever languages that the students are developing in the school context. Number 4, so we have looked at reading as the linguistic process, yeah, reading as a meaning-making process, and then also reading as a, what was that, the other one? Reading as a proficiency-building process. The 4th one, which is closely related to critical reading, discerning reading, is this, yeah. So on top of the earlier 3 processes, I think literacy experts believe that reading is also an evaluative process. So the onus is on the readers to read, to understand, to believe, and not to believe what is presented in the text. Now, this is where the readers will have to take a critical stand and be able to ask questions and understand both the stated and the implied meaning of the text. Yeah, the readers will have to ask questions like, is the information facts or is it based on opinions? Does the writer write the text from a certain philosophical perspectives, from certain biological perspective, whether the information presented in the text is believable, credible, and things like that. Now, this is something that we also need to teach in our reading lesson to help the students become more discerning and to become more, critical as well. It's a lot of things that the students will need in order for them to be able to evaluate a piece of text critically for that purpose. I think what we need to do is what sort of knowledge and skills and dispositions are needed. Is it enough for us to just teach these things to our students in the classroom? I think the answer is probably not enough. Yeah, point number one, and let me say this again, students need a very strong word knowledge, and they also need to have a wide world knowledge. Without these two, critical reading is just not possible. Point number two, we also need to develop their critical thinking skills. Things like questioning the author, not just believing everything that is presented in the text. They need to be asking questions. Is the author credible? What is his or her qualification, for example? And it also falls upon the reader to double check, to trace the source of information presented in the text. Who is the author? What are their credentials? What is the source of the text? Is the author biased? What is missing and not presented by the author in that particular text? How can I verify the content? So asking all these questions can be very useful when you teach reading, when you teach critical thinking in the classroom. Yeah. Perhaps more important than that is our willingness to open up the learning space, to allow the students to, or to, for us to create a more thinking culture in the school context. Like in the classroom, for example, stop asking multiple choice questions. That's a very bad thing, because if you believe critical thinking is important, I think you should ask a lot more open-ended questions. The kind of questions that would allow for divergent answers, not just a single answer. I think you need to be more tolerant in terms of accepting different responses from your students. You should also be open when the students question your answers, when when the students challenge conventional wisdom and all that. I think you need to be more open to accepting different or divergent answers for the students. And for that, I think we need to go back to the quality of the teacher. Are you an open-minded teacher? Are you a lifelong learner? Are you a good listener? Surprise, surprise. Many of us, including me, are not very open-minded. I'm just learning to be more open-minded, now. And I'm also trying to learn to be more, engaged in developing further information as a lifelong learner. And I also try very hard to become a more, a better listener at home and also in the classroom as well. So these are the 4 or 5 reading processes. Yeah, keep in mind, all these are very important. The first part, the second, and the third will have to be in place. These are so foundational. Without, the first 3 linguistic processes, I think reading, critically becomes really difficult for our students. Yeah. So once the first 3 processes are in place, then we can move on and begin talking about the purpose for which a text is written. And that is when we can start teaching our students to be more discerning by, going through the text with a more critical mind. In other words, reading, looking at reading as an evaluative process. The last part, Calvin, give me 2 or 3 minutes and I'll be done very quickly.
Yeah,
yeah?
sure. Yes, okay.
Now, this is the most important part. Many of us believe that critical thinking is important. I too believe that critical thinking is important, but surprisingly and frustratingly perhaps, that critical thinking is very, very difficult to teach. I think we need to appreciate that fact. Research tells us that many of us have not been successful in creating a critical thinking culture in our school. We have not been successful in helping our students become more critical and more discerning in their reading or in their engagement with textual information, whether it is written or orally presented. Now, here are some of the reasons. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier on. Now, if you are interested, please Google this article. The title is Knowledge Matters. And this piece of article was written by a cognitive scientist. And he has been looking at the importance of critical thinking, and he's been trying to understand why critical thinking is very, very difficult to teach. And one of the theses that he has is that knowledge is a foundation. Without sufficient knowledge, you cannot think critically. Yeah. Now, this is important if you deal with students, of low literacy, both in L1 and L2. Teaching critical thinking is just not possible. Maybe only to a small extent, yeah. Number two, poor knowledge base. Yes, many of our students are not, have a very small knowledge base. And because of that, when they read for information, they tend to just believe everything that is presented in the text. And point number three, this is very interesting. Critical thinking turns out to be domain specific. If you know a lot about football, for example, yeah, you can be very critical when you watch people playing football. Yeah. If you ask me, for example, a question about extensive reading, because I know a lot about extensive reading, I think I'll be able to tell you, things that is empirically validated and things that is still not, considered an established fact within the extensive reading domain. If you send me a proposal, research proposal on extensive reading, for example, I can very quickly point out, hey, there's something here that is missing. There's something here that is just not correct. Yeah, that critical thinking is possible because I know a lot of that, domain knowledge. Let's just have some example about Joseph. I'm sorry.
Yes, probably.
Yes. Okay. Now here's a video that I came across recently. So the idea, that the person is trying to get across to the audience, the YouTube audience is, well, if you want to learn English, you have to think in English. My question to you is this good advice or bad advice? Just good advice or bad advice?
Well, it depends on how you view it. I think personally, it's not that good because
it's not that good. It's bad advice.
possibly,
Yes, I think you're hesitant to say. I think you're pretty much with me. It's bad advice. You can't think in English when you are still learning English. You can't. It's just not possible. Now, here's another one. Master all 12 English tenses in 20 minutes, yes or no?
Impossible.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have a lot of knowledge about, the English language, then you may just believe what this person is saying in that video. It is just, number one, not possible. And number two, it's probably not the most productive way of spending your time, not even 20 minutes. Yeah. The mastering English tenses in 20 minutes is just not possible and not a good idea. But Josh, another question for you. If you show this to your typical students at Satya Wacana University, and if you ask them, what is this, infographic is trying to tell us, do you think they'll be able to do this?
No, it's not fair. Yeah, I showed this to some of my students. It's not fair. How can you measure me with the same criteria for everyone? It doesn't fit into anybody's liking or competence.
Yeah. The point I want to get across is this. If you don't know much about education, then this may be a bit difficult to understand. I think this is about appreciating diversity when we teach, and also appreciating diversity when we assess our students. So there's no one size fits all, basically. Yeah. But unless you have that knowledge in your head, it's very, very difficult for you to be critical and to understand what is the hidden or the implied message of this infographic. Another important thing, this is what I've learned from reading, either the professional literature or from the general psychology, psychological books like this one. It turns out that people, you and me, tend to think very, very, very fast. And fast thinking, also known as intuitive thinking, is not good where critical thinking is concerned. Critical thinking requires that you stop, you reflect, and you try to analyze things, to see things from different perspectives. You cannot do it too quickly. And yet, our tendency as a human being is to be thinking fast, intuitive thinking. Human almost immediately when you're presented with a problem. Yeah. Now, if you are looking for something that is less technical, less academic, I would recommend that you read Malcolm Gladwell. And the title of that book is Blink. So essentially, that is what he's trying to say in that novel, that people try to think so fast, it's like a blink of the eye. Very quickly, you see something, you make a decision almost immediately. And that kind of thinking is not good for people who do not have a lot of knowledge in the first place. But for people who has a lot of knowledge base, that blink actually is possible. Again, just using me as an example, I've been in education, English language education for many, many years. I can think in a blink when I'm faced with a problem related to English language teaching because I have a lot of knowledge. Yeah, that is possible. For people who have very little knowledge about ELT, for example, that fast thinking is likely to be not very useful. On top of that, now this is again something that we have learned from the literature, that the way we think is very much influenced by things that we have in our head. The halo effect, for example. These are known as cognitive biases or thinking biases. The halo effect. I think we tend to associate, for example, in academia, the word scopus, for example, is associated with something that is academic, something that is good. Yeah. My example here is a journal called Canadian Center of Science and Education. It was once indexed in Scopus, and look at the name of the publisher, Canadian Center of Science and Education. Then you put these two together, I think you fall into a trap here of what is known as the halo effect and confirmation bias. Yeah, Scopus is good, Canada is good, then this journal must be good. It's very, very easy for people to fall into the trap here. Yeah, so be careful of the biases that you may not be aware are influencing the way you think, the way you solve problem, and the way you try to read with critical eye. Groupthink bias, that is another well-reported bias that people have. People tend to go with the crowd. If a lot of people say that something is good, then you tend to be influenced and say that, yes, that thing is good. Now, in academia, for example, people with, a lot of citation counts are usually, considered very well-cited individuals, and that person must be very popular, and that person must be very good. And when that happens, you sort of stop, being critical of what that person is saying in his research, although what he's saying may not be a wonderful thing. And finally, things like gender bias may influence the way you assess information and the way you make a conclusion based on your reading. For example, men and women are not created equal, for example. And when you read a piece of article written by women, then you tend to be thinking in a certain way. If the information is written by a female, by a male academic, then you may be thinking in a certain way. So these are biases that we need to be aware of. And if you do that, then you may just be at the starting point of becoming a more discerning and critical readers. To conclude, I've shared with you 3 important points about reading. First, the benefits of reading, and number 2, the processes of reading, and number 3, more importantly, a good understanding of why critical thinking is difficult, why critical thinking is hard to teach and also to learn. Maybe one important takeaway, if you want to start thinking and creating a good thinking culture in your school context, this is a piece of advice that is probably a very good way to start. Yeah, ask your students to think more slowly, basically. Ask them to stop, ask them to think before they make any conclusion, before they make any decision. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Renandia. I think we have many insightful ideas from this presentation. And audience, please join me to give virtual claps to Dr. Willy Renandya.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to respond to 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we move on with the next presentation by Dr. Daisy Tan.
Okay. Sorry, I think I was kicked out. Okay. Yeah, sorry, one or 2 questions perhaps from
Yes, there are 2 or 3 people who raised their hands.
yeah, I'll just ask Luma Dedui to activate your microphone and ask your questions directly, please. Thank you.
Yes, Ibu Made, Dwi.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for the nice presentation. I think there are also so many Indonesian teacher and participant in here, and also
Yeah.
maybe the teacher and lecturers from the other countries.
Mm.
Okay, just wondering about the critical thinking that we have in Indonesian curriculum that recently known as Merdeka curriculum. Yeah,
Mm.
it's related with your presentation just now, Mr.
Mm.
And then there is a question, just like me as a teacher, as a lecturer, and also as a mother. Yeah,
Mm.
as we know that in Indonesia, the students start to learn English in general in junior high school.
Yes.
Start in junior high school.
Yes.
And then I learned also as the younger students learn English also. But how do we as a teacher make them think?
Yes, I think I understand your
like
question.
reading and think critically.
Yes, Ibu Dewi, thank you so much for your question. I think I understand.
Mr.
Yes. My advice, if you want to teach critical thinking to your students, do it in Bahasa Indonesia. Don't do it in English. If their level of English proficiency is very low, it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to just understanding is difficult enough for them in Bahasa Inggris, in English. If that is already difficult, asking them to go deeper into the text, making use of their critical thinking skills becomes just impossible. So if you ask me, do it later. When the students have already had sufficient proficiency in the English language, then you can teach that in Bahasa Inggris. But before that, I think my suggestion is for you to teach critical thinking in Bahasa Indonesia, and also invite the other teachers in the school to also pay attention, to also start teaching critical thinking in when they teach, the sciences, when they teach history, when they teach social studies and all that. Yeah. It is not our only job as an English teacher to teach critical thinking skills. And maybe Bahasa Inggris is not the best way for us to teach critical thinking because our students are still at the very low end of the proficiency level. Ya, jadi ada hubungan yang sangat, there's a very big relationship between language and thinking. If your language is weak in the first place, then thinking in that language becomes difficult. Thank you so much, Ibu. Are you from Bali, Ibu? Are you from Bali? Yes, you're from Bali. Thank you.
Okay. All right, but Willy, perhaps one more question from Gafar.
Yes.
Gafar, could you please unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask the question directly?
Oh, he's not there.
Gafar, are you there?
No, he's not there. Yes, another question, please.
Oh, Gafar is there, Willy.
Actually, good afternoon,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes,
Mr.
question.
Zainal, this is Habib from Pakistan. Currently, I'm in Cambodia working as a science and math teacher. My question is, my students also facing about reading and dictation, spellings. They can't memorize, they can't spell nicely.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest about
Yes, I think you need to strengthen their language skills first. And the best way, if you ask me, the best way to strengthen students' language proficiency, spelling, writing, speaking, and so on and so forth is through reading. Yeah, first reading very, very easy books. But they have to do it on a daily basis. They have to do it every day.
Thank you.
And then gradually increase the level of sophistication of their reading. So reading is or has been shown to be the most powerful way of increasing students' literacy. Now, this is true in the students' first language. So in the Philippines, for example, that will be increasing, strengthening students' proficiency in the Filipino language, maybe. In Indonesia, it has to be the first thing that you need to do. You know, strengthening, improving the proficiency of your students' Bahasa Indonesia. Bapak Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen from Indonesia, surprise, surprise, a lot of Indonesian people do not have a very good grasp of Bahasa Indonesia. Oral, yes. Written Bahasa, not good. They may be able to read the sentence, they may be able to read the text, but their comprehension, their ability to make inferences, they are not very good at meaning making yet. Yeah, their language is weak. Their knowledge is also not very strong. Now, these are two very important combinations. Without these two, thinking becomes really, really nearly impossible. Yeah, but some of you may be saying, well, my students do a lot of reading in social media. Is that a good thing? Well, it's not a bad thing, but it's not very useful. Media. Yes, because you're reading a small bit of information here, a small bit of information here, a small bit of information here. The students are never engaged in, deeper level of processing of the information that they have seen, from different places. If you're looking for a technical term to describe this kind of reading, I think it's called disjointed reading, or reading disjointed discourse. Yeah, it's not a bad thing, but it's not very useful. If your goal is to improve your students' literacy level, especially critical literacy level, then I think you need to get students to do a lot more reading. That will be the very, very first step. Without that, nothing much is possible.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Pak Willy, for the answers.
Thank
we
you.
Still have many questions, but we'll keep your question for later because we'll have minutes of panel discussion. Okay. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. Willy Renandya, for your presentation. And now I will turn the time to Dr. Daisy Tan, our second speaker for the day. And let me introduce her to you all for brief. So Dr. Daisy teaches undergraduate and postgraduate students in communication management at the Nanyang Business School, or NBS, at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Prior to joining NBS, she was an adjunct lecturer at Lee Kong Chian School of Business at SMU, and was with Singapore Airlines regional wing, Silk Air. Dr. Daisy coaches public speaking to the Miss Singapore International pageant contestants organized by Singapore Women's Association. What a rare and a great experience, Dr. Daisy. And she has just completed her doctor in education at the National Institute of Education. And in her free time, Dr. Daisy enjoys walking, running, and the occasional yoga practice, keeping in touch with her first love, sports. Okay, so Dr. Daisy, now the screen is yours, and you have 25 minutes to present. Thank you, Dr. Daisy.
Thank you, Calvin, for such a warm introduction. Hello, everybody from Singapore. Hope everyone is feeling all right this afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Dr. Willy, for such a valuable presentation. I learned quite a bit from you. I come from the same university as Dr. Willy, and where I teach, the Nanyang Business School, is just a walk away from National Institute of Education. If you Google Nanyang Business School, you will see that we now have Asia's largest wooden building. So please come, when you come to Singapore, if you drop by Nanyang Business School, drop me an email, and perhaps we can meet up. Thank you for your time to listen in on my presentation today, which is to share with you what we can do in terms of critical thinking when we teach business communication. How would that relate to your practice in the classroom? Maybe you're going to teach oral presentation skills. So this critical thinking presentation on business communication could benefit your practice. Let me continue. So Dr. Willy covered 3 things. I have 7. Okay, let me go through the outline. Today, I will begin with the importance of effective business oral presentation skills. I will also mention the framework that we use in the business school when we teach business communication skills to our students. And I will also go through the framework that I have for my dissertation, which is how credibility, speaker credibility, can be enhanced through critical literacy and also critical visual literacy. So what I did was to combine both of them in my teaching so that students can have critical thinking when they are doing oral presentation skills. The combination of these two, I actually suggested a 4-step process model, which I will discuss. And I will introduce to you 2 of the 4 tools that I used, and also establish the findings from my dissertation and end off with the conclusion. We all know how effective presentation skills is important to at the workplace. Not only do people recruit us based on how we present, how we appear confident and professional, we know that speaking well gives us success at the workplace. And not only at the undergrad level, even when I teach the master's level, some students come in telling me that they have forgotten how to conduct themselves confidently when they are presenting. And all these are backed by research that I found. What you see in front of you are 2 issues that I found in terms of oral presentation skills or public speaking. You have in front of you 2 issues of anxiety and confidence and gender differences. So these are the 2 key areas that came up during my research on how there are issues in public speaking, right? As you can see, 50% of 50 undergraduates were found to lack confidence and they feel anxious when they're presenting, right? And 70% especially find it very nervous when they have to make an oral presentation, which culminates to an assessment grade, right? And undergrads, when they are nervous, they tend to have a lot of filler words like And also they may pause for some time because they are trying to find out what they are going to say next. But Hindu et al. And Nash et al., they found that all these can be mitigated if we were to train students on presentation skills. So aside from students feeling anxious and feeling the lack of confidence, there's also another issue of gender differences in terms of how a speaker appears credible to audiences. So what you see on the right would be that audiences actually find female speakers to be less credible than male speakers because their preferences would be for the dynamism and then for the competency of male presenters, right? And let's say if a female presenter would want to be more credible, if they had spoken with a deep voice, a lower pitched voice, they would come across as more credible. So in terms of gender differences for oral presentation skills, the preferences is for male speakers as in the audiences would feel that male speakers are more credible. And then female speakers would have to speak a certain way in order to gain that credibility. So these are the issues that I found in my study, and I'll continue on to how I've mitigated these two issues. Right in front of you would be the framework that we use in the business school when we teach whether or not postgrad level or undergrad level in the business communication course. So we call this model the SCM, the strategic contingency model, which is formulated by two of my colleagues. Whenever you have to design a message, you have to think of the goal that you want to achieve. That is the very first step, right? With that goal in mind, you can go on to analyze the situation that you are in. And these are the 4 factors that we propose students to think about when they have to, before they design their message. So they have to think about who is the sender? Are they credible enough? Who are the audience members? Right? What do they want? The 4 objectives of communication, there are 4. Is your message one that is meant to build relationships? Is your message one that is to sell a product? Is your message one that is out to motivate people? Or is your message all about just giving information? Right? So before students think about the sender audience objectives, they also need to think about the situation. Are they in the classroom? Or are they going to present outside of the classroom to another school, for example? So the context would change the design of the message that they have to come up with. So after analyzing the 4 factors, students start to design a message. So they choose the medium that they want to design. Is it a face-to-face presentation or is it Zoom presentation? So if they know that it is a Zoom presentation, they must up their enthusiasm a bit more. They must add their more vocal variety to their presentation because Zoom itself mutes so much of your energy, right? So they must consider all these. And of course, lastly, decide what kind of approach they want to use for their message. Do they want to be very upfront about the main point of their message? Or do they want to explain a little bit, wait a little while longer, then they tell the audience what is the main point of their message, right? Now, for students to analyze all these, design their message, there is this thing that we propose in the framework is to get students to always, have some self-feedback when they are designing their message. For example, if I were to say this sentence, is it appropriate for the audience? So the feedback loop is one that is on a continuum. You keep on adjusting so that you can get what is appropriate for that situation that you are in, right? Sadly, before I go on to that, there are 3 ways that we give feedback to our students in general, feedback is given in 3 ways. We do peer evaluation, we do self-assessment, and of course, instructors, we give feedback. However, in terms of feedback, there is no theory that has been so far used for our strategic contingency model. So my research actually proposes a critical literacy and critical visual literacy theory into this feedback for students to use and encourage critical thinking. This is my framework for my study on how I can help to enhance students' credibility when they are presenting. So for my research, we can manipulate our credibility via 2 ways. Our use of presentation skills and how the use of our presentation skills would convey some power to our audience. And right in the middle, what you see is the 4-step process model that I have come up with, which is a combination of 2 theories, which I'll show now. Okay, so in this theory, it's taken from Jenks, Hilary Jenks, and it's also a consideration of Widowson's theory on recontextualization. So to encourage students to go through the critical thinking process, 4 steps would need to be involved. First of all, they need to know how to critique what they have used, right? They have to know how they have used what they used, and they must go through the process of how they can actually redesign what they have designed. And lastly, which is the 4th step, they would need to think about what if there is another situation, another context that they are in. Can they design something that is just as good or better? Not only just for the context that they have been thinking about redesigning. Perhaps today's presentation is in the classroom, but if tomorrow's presentation is to a panel of angel investors, would they be able to design a good message to the audience? So this is the 4-step cycle that 4-step process that I took my students through to ignite that critical thinking process when I taught oral presentation skills during the course of my study. The 2 tools that I use, there are 2 tools. So they are called CVLC because it's called Critical Visual Literacy Checklist. So there's checklist 1 and checklist 2. Let me zoom in on the first checklist. So this is the checklist that I've come up with. The checklist contains 5 essential non-verbal presentation skills from my research. The most important 5 non-verbal presentation skills that speakers need to take note of. So I got students to observe 1 minute of their 3-minute recorded presentation. So they have recorded their presentations earlier, and I got them only to view their first minute. Now, why the first minute? Because the first minute is the first minute that is usually when students are most nervous. Yeah, based on research, the 2nd and the 3rd minute is when errors and stuttering or slip-ups happen less. So the first minute would be when problems would surface, especially when it's a presentation. That's when speakers are most nervous. So I took them through to stop at every 5 seconds of their video and to see if they've used filler words, if they've used facial expressions, right? So for every 5 seconds, they have to pause and watch themselves and describe what they have seen themselves doing. Let me take you through the next tool. The next tool is a list of 5 questions that I've synthesized from 3 researchers, Luke, Bull and Anstey's another research paper, and Widowson. So these are the 5 questions I got them to reflect, right? So these reflecting questions allow them to consider their design and allow them to consider even the chance of redesigning. And the last question, which is to allow them to consider if they're in another context, right? How will they be using these nonverbal cues? It's not enough just to think about how they will do what they have done better. They have to think about the next step. In another situation, what would they do? So I've gotten students to use these 2 tools this way. I have 48 participants, my students. So group 1 would be the control group. They have none of the intervention. Group 2, they only had the first instrument, which is to look at 5 nonverbal presentation skills. But group 3, they have both intervention. So what did I find from the first checklist? So female participants, they were found to use fewer body movements. They were more poised, right? And they smiled a lot when they're presenting. And they gave the audience more eye contact. What about male participants? They were more fluent. They used fewer filler words. They use a different set of hand gestures. They use the open palm. Whereas for the female speakers, they tend to use it for illustration. So it's very different types of nonverbal cues that female participants and male participants use. The overall conclusion is when they design their message, female and male participants, they actually use different sets of nonverbal cues in the way that I've shared with you. What about for the second tool? What did I find? Females are were more aware of their target audience. And why they smile a lot, because their perception is the audience would want them to come across as approachable and friendly. And why did they look at the audience? So look at the video recording is actually via Zoom. So why do they give so much eye contact? It's because they want to appear likable to the audience. Now, what about male participants? They assume that the audience would want them to look professional. So instead of smiling so much, they actually use a lot of raising of their eyebrows, like this, right, when they're presenting. Now, from my findings, did the students consider redesign? Were they involved in critical thinking? The answer is yes, because they considered that they would redesign their use of hand gestures and eye contact, right? So female participants actually thought that, hey, they should have used their hands for greater emphasis, right? And male participants, they actually thought about their eye contact, and then they felt that they needed to look at the camera more. So what about recontextualization, which is the last question of the second checklist, right? Did they consider if they would want to, design their nonverbal cues better if they're in a separate context? The answer is yes, right? But the difference between the two is female participants were more goal-oriented. They were very focused on, if we are doing it for the next presentation, we would do this. But male participants tend to think further, right? They were more concerned about how they could utilize their nonverbal cues in conversations, right? And a finding that was quite evident was male participants actually mentioned more specific strategies, how they would do differently compared to female participants. So the finding about male speakers being more confident is something that could be indicative here that they are already more confident in what they know or how they would do in their next presentation. So they are looking ahead on how they can design their next, for example, oral presentation skills, but in the next different context that they'll be in. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide. In addition to the two tools that I've used, I've also conducted focus group interviews, right? So the findings actually from the second group and the third group, not the control group, indicated that, I've heard from the students through their discussions in the focus group interviews that they were engaged in self-feedback. So they acknowledged that they were engaged in self-feedback. And then the male participants from the intervention groups showed awareness that they themselves have to be in charge of their own credibility. So they are the designer of their message. They have to pick and choose the right nonverbal cues to appear more credible to their audiences. If given a chance, right, would they ever want to do their assessment again? Okay, for example, if they have a chance, would they want to do their presentations again? Students actually said that they would, right? And they showed awareness. And if there is a comparison during the focus group interviews, I asked the students which tool would be better for them, more preferred for them. And they actually chose the first tool, which is the one that has 5 nonverbal cues for them. The reason why is because they found it was very useful for them to see, oh no, I had a filler word, right? Oh, then I need to work on it. So the redesign process seems to be quicker in that sense, more specific, and they could work on their mistakes quite immediately. I've spoken a lot about my dissertation. Is only a small part for such a long dissertation, and I really hope that if you have a chance, you can read my study and you can have a broader, how do I say, a more insightful view of all those things. This is quite a short summary of the findings from my research. But in conclusion, right, both self-assessment tools actually showed to a certain extent that they help in terms of critical thinking. But the first tool, the one with 5 nonverbal cues, would be the most preferred one. And I would think the one that could create that critical thinking most or more. And from my findings, students were engaged in the 4-step process of critique, deconstruction, redesign, and recontextualization. The 4 steps which I have considered and synthesized from the theories to have encouraged critical thinking. Lastly, to wrap everything up, self-assessments, all these are done by students alone. It's not peer evaluation, it's not from me, but getting them to reflect on their own work using critical literacy and critical visual literacy can actually train them to be reflective practitioners. We can't be there with them all the time. So if they are allowed to have that opportunity to just spend some time to look at their own presentation, to go through the 5 nonverbal cues and answer some reflective questions, their learning and their experiences, actually they can make, that can be a reconciliation of some sort, and that will be like a spark, I know what to do next time. And I guess that's about all that I have for you in this short sharing. And I'm happy to take any questions that you would have for me.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Daisy. Everybody, please give virtual clap to Dr. Daisy. Okay. All right. For the session, I think I'll invite 2 questions for Dr. Daisy. I think I see Mike Jasaf. Mike, are you there? Please unmute yourself, activate your camera, and then
I hope to help in any way I can with your questions.
Okay, Mike, are you there?
Hi, thank you very much, Daisy, for your presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have 2 questions. Question number 1 is with regards to the focus group interviews.
Yep.
Are these interviewees, are they part of your students, or are they standalone students?
Oh, yeah, I can answer that. They are from the 48 participants. So for every group, I selected randomly via random.org 6 students each from each group.
All right, so there's 6 students interviewees from your group, right?
Yeah.
Question number 2 that I have is with regards to the frameworks that you have regarding redesigning, recontextualizing. I'm kind of trying to process that. In what way are those dimensions a reflection of criticality? Are you looking at essentially critical reflection here? In other words, to get the participants to think about the moves that they have made in their presentation skills. Is that what do you mean specifically in terms of checking the box for criticality? Yeah, that's my last question. Thank you.
Yeah, I am getting them to that consideration. I'm getting them to pick out the what do they see, and I'm getting them to think about why they have done so and how they can do better. So it is a consideration, because for the business comms module, we don't have the time to carry out another session of getting them to redo their presentation. It's a very packed 13 weeks of not only do I teach business presentation skills, I teach business writing as well. So it's a module that is very packed. We also teach negotiation. We teach small group communication. We teach a slide deck report, which is report writing in terms of in a slide deck form. So we don't have another session for them to come to do your presentation better. So the only time that I was thinking that can get students to even do that, but without having to actually do it, is to get them to just make that consideration. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Daisy, for the answer. Perhaps before going to Kafar, can I give the opportunity to another participant? Okay. I see Christian Holipas raising his hand. Christian, are you there? Christian, are you there?
Hello.
Hi,
good
Christian.
afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I actually sent a question, but allow me to read it for you. Ma'am Daisy,
Yes.
as an English teacher, what are the best ways to teach critical thinking skills to high school students? Because here in the Philippines, I want to enhance the students' critical thinking skills because I teach in college. What are the best ways what are the best ways I can do to teach my students?
In terms of writing or speaking?
In terms of writing and speaking.
Maybe I can share what I do when I teach business writing. For business writing, I don't do self-assessment. I do peer assessment. So students actually have their work viewed by, can be 4 or 5 of their classmates. And for example, I'm viewing your piece of work now, right, Christian? So I'll look through your work, and I will also look at the rubrics that we have for writing, and I'll make comments on your work. And once I'm done, I will pass on to the next person, right? So when your work is viewed by 3 or 4 of your peers, you will take a seat and see how you can reconcile all the comments. So this is one way that you can consider if you're going to teach writing. I hope I answered your question. Christian?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Daisy, for all the answers. And I think.
Can I just say a word of thanks to the organizers? And I also must thank Dr. Willy, because without his supervision for my dissertation, I wouldn't have come this far. Thank you.
Good. Daisy, would you encourage the participants to come to NIE and do their
of course.
graduate studies?
Yeah, please. if you are really, for example, personally, I love learning. I've always loved to study, and I've always loved to problem solve. And the Ph.D, the Doctor in Education, was a fantastic way for me to see a problem that's existing in the business comms module that I teach. And with Dr. Willy's help, I was able to go through the literature resources and, think about the research tools and find a solution to mitigate the problem. But thank you, everyone, for your attention, and also the 2 questions from Gafar and Christian. Over to you, Kelvin.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Daisy. All right, so before we move to the next session, I would like to give you brief information from the committee. And yeah, all the presenters' materials, as well as the link to this webinar recording, will be sent to your email, okay? And later on, minutes before we end this webinar, the committee will send you the exit tickets, which you can later on fill out the information there to request an electronic certificate. Okay, so all right, so now I would like to invite Professor Joseph Ernest Mambu, our 3rd speaker for the day. Professor Joseph Ernest Mambu is an English language teacher educator in the master's program in English language education, Satya Wacana Christian University. Professor Joseph completed his Ph.D. in Arizona State University in the United States. Professor Joseph is committed to delving into social justice issues viewed through the lens of critical spiritual pedagogy. It is Professor Joseph's belief that language, including language learning and teaching, plays a pivotal role in one's attempt to make sense of and express spirituality and criticality. His most recent article, entitled Co-Constructing a Critical ELT Curriculum, case study in an Indonesian-based English language teacher education program, was recently published in the TESOL journal. So, Professor Joseph, now the screen is yours, and you have 20 to 25 minutes, to present. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Joseph Ernest Mambu.
Thank you, Pak Calvin. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all again. And this is the 3rd session of today's webinar. And I think I have to thank Pak Willy as well for the 1st session of our webinar. And there's one thing that I noticed. There are a couple of things. One of them is that it is hard to teach critical thinking. Yes, I have to say I agree with that, even though I would say it is not impossible, but still, it is very hard. And yes, read a lot is the key of improving students, especially our learners' critical thinking. I remember my conversation with Professor Paul K. Matsuda, my Ph.D. supervisor. Read everything, he said to the students. And then one of our critical students said, or asked him, have you read everything? And then Paul said, well, I didn't say I have read everything, but read everything anyway. Yeah, especially if you want to master a certain piece of field, like a certain field, like extensive reading in Pak Willy Renandya's case, or in my case, critical pedagogy and literacy. Yeah, so you need to read extensively in that in order for you to improve the critical thinking. And I think Dr. Daisy has also exemplified how critical reflection on and business communication plays a great role in improving business students' criticality. Yeah. Okay, I would like to share my presentation. Let me share that. I hope everyone can have a look at this. And I hope that everyone can hear my voice. Okay, so this is the title, Critical Thinking in the Language Classroom. I have 3 major things that I would like to discuss. The what question, what is critical thinking or CT, some perspectives from the literature, and then the why question. Why do we need CT? And then the last one, I hope I can have some views about how to implement critical thinking in the language classroom. Yeah, based on what I have found so far, critical thinking involves cognitive skills for example, interpreting, analyzing, and evaluating. And then the disposition or critical thinking character, so to speak. For example, inquisitiveness or curiosity, open-mindedness, and Willy Renandya has mentioned that earlier, and autonomy. This is from Paul and Elder, two notable scholars in critical thinking in another field, not necessarily general education. It's even wider. But they are cited by Yuan and Stapleton in the ELT journal recently published in 2020. And according to one of the most recent textbooks on critical thinking, especially in the field of English language teaching, I'm happy to come across this work by Hadley and Boone entitled Critical Thinking. According to them, critical thinking is a teachable mental skill. It is hard, but it is not impossible. In fact, it is teachable. A teachable mental skill that enables a person to uncover the underlying beliefs and assumptions behind the messages they encounter during their daily lives. Pay careful attention to the words of others, whether it is trustworthy, whether it is a piece of hoax or things like that. Enables a person to mentally assess the validity of statements, consider the potential ramifications of the conclusions. I sum up some of the ideas I quoted directly from Hadley and Boone. Some more. A teachable mental skill that enables a person to respond in a way that is organized, respectful, and logical. Be open-minded. Be aware of the limits of what one really knows about a subject or issue. I'm not a master of everything, but Willy knows his limitation. I know my limitation. I might be familiar with extensive reading, but when it comes to reviewing a proposal on extensive reading, but Willy is definitely a better person to do that. A teachable mental skill enable persons to be inclined toward polite skepticism. So this is one of the characteristics. Skeptical, but in a polite way, when presented with information that is new, potentially life-changing, or that argues for a certain side. Be persistently curious and avoid jumping to conclusions until they can determine what can be reasonably known about a certain topic. Those are some of the criteria. But I think it's sometimes difficult to change one's belief. Questioning one's own belief might cause discomfort, in fact. It's hard for a person to change their beliefs, but if a person is committed to critical thinking, it is necessary even to question his or her own belief. Well, of course, I'm not going too far here, though, to promote questioning one's own spiritual beliefs, our spirituality. What I can say here is what I can say for the time being is that when someone wants to grow spiritually, sometimes she or he needs to cast into doubt some of the practices. For example, slavery or bullying in the name of a certain religion, including his or her own religious faith. But that's the only thing that I could say. So it doesn't mean that because someone has a spiritual belief that he or she cannot be critical. He or she can also be critical toward the practices in the name of religion that he or she has. Not necessarily criticizing other people's religions, but one's own practices associated with his own or her own religion. But anyway, so I'm enough about spirituality here, even though Calvin has mentioned that I am interested in critical spiritual pedagogy. But suffice to say that I would like only to comment on that. So critical thinking can create or make some discomfort when it comes to challenging one's own belief. But if someone is committed to critical thinking, that's something that we need to do as well. In the literature of English language teaching, there is a piece published also in the ELT journal by Banegas and Villacanias de Castro in 2016, and they discussed the difference between, or the relationship, the close relationship between critical thinking and critical pedagogy. And both of them are part of the larger umbrella of criticality. I noticed that one of the participants did mention about criticality. Yeah, criticality in Banegas and Villacanias de Castro's view include critical thinking and critical pedagogy. Critical thinking, like what I discussed, is more cognitively biased, deciding what to believe. Cognitively based. So it includes deciding what to believe or do, the use of higher order thinking skills or HOTS, questioning one's own assumptions. Again, this is evaluation, higher order thinking skills, analyze news, advertisements, and so forth and so on. Critical pedagogy seeks empowerment and social transformation. And I was happy, I'm still happy, when Dr. Daisy mentioned Hilary Jenks. Hilary Jenks is a notable scholar in critical literacy, and I think the notion of empowerment is also part of her concern as well. The larger umbrella of critical literacy is also part of critical pedagogy. So according to Banegas and Villacanias de Castro, critical pedagogy includes critical thinking plus being aware of inequalities in our society, plus work towards the creation of possibilities for action, not just thought. Critical pedagogy also involves countering practices which reproduce an unequal distribution of power. Well, in a more radical sense, critical thinking, according to Paulo Freire, the father of critical pedagogy, according to him, critical thinking contrasts with naive thinking. Yeah, so it challenges the status quo. Yeah, basically it challenges the assumptions or a belief that only perpetuates injustice in the status quo. But I won't go too far on this because there will be a course for the, there is a course devoted to this, and I am offering critical pedagogy and literacy. But my point here is that criticality in the ELT includes both critical thinking and critical pedagogy that aims for social justice through education. Now, my second larger agenda for today is why do we need critical thinking? Recent findings in a 3-year Master of TESOL program in a Chinese-based university suggest that pre-service EFL teachers' understanding of critical thinking was lacking, but growing. Yeah. There was an inadequate support for the student teachers to cultivate critical thinking. One participant even said, as a language teacher, I do not know how to develop critical thinking in the classroom. There was a perceived incompatibility with the local situation. Some of the participants said, well, yeah, the critical thinking is probably necessary, but it doesn't prepare the students to be ready for the exam. Yeah, it's in a Chinese situation and probably similar to Hong Kong situation back then. Yeah, so why do we need city if the local situation doesn't really provide ample opportunity for the students to really develop critical thinking, apart from preparing the students for the exam? And another challenge for doing critical thinking, and Hadley and Boone has a debate or presented a debate in the literature. Aren't we just forcing our students to adopt Western styles of thinking? Because usually people think of critical thinking as associated with the Western worldview. Well, according to them, and I agree, it is a mistake to assume that some students have less critical thinking skills because they're not from the West. And in fact, people from the West can also be uncritical. The portrayal of Western as opposed to Eastern thinking can be grossly stereotypical, I agree. Critical thinking is learned through constant and purposeful practice. Those from the West who do not learn CT can be uncritical, as I said. Critical thinking skills and dispositions are active within people throughout the world, even though they may be expressed with different terminology or with different emphasis. People, wherever they are from, they have critical thinking, and if they want to nurture critical thinking, it is okay. Yeah, critical thinking is part of our nature, or in Bahasa Indonesia we say kodrat, that we human beings have to nurture. So everyone, I believe, has the capacity to improve critical thinking, but the question is whether they want it or not. And why do we have to nurture critical thinking? Well, yeah, we do not want to be deceived. For example, believing in hoaxes. No, we don't want to be deceived. And we want to avoid ourselves from being liars, for example, by spreading hoaxes. And we want to solve real-world complex problems. Solving real-world complex problems? Yeah, for example, exploiting crude oil might keep jobs and supply more energy, but damage the natural environment. That's a complex problem. How can we solve that problem? Yeah, this dilemma applies not only in the United States, but also in Indonesia. So in evaluating societal decisions, critical thinkers pay close attention to the cost-benefit ratio underlying those decisions. Indonesia is facing the presidential election next year, and it's one of the real-world complex problems. Are we going to vote for somebody instead of the others? Yeah, cost-benefit ratio is analyzing or paying close attention to the cost-benefit ratio, or waiving the disadvantages and advantages will be a practice that students can also exercise. And I agree. I think Willy has said, if it is too difficult to use Bahasa Inggris or the foreign language like English, then the students can definitely start using their first language first. And why do we need critical thinking? And I remember one of the teachers from Indonesia, from Bali, asked about how can we use critical thinking. Yes, in the Indonesian current curriculum called Curriculum Merdeka or Emancipated Curriculum, bernalar kritis or critical thinking and reasoning is one of the pillars, is one of the Pancasila student profile set by the Indonesian government. So in the Indonesian context, critical thinking is compulsory by today's stipulation or government's regulation. So yes, it is compulsory. It is necessary for teachers and students to learn how to think critically. The question then becomes, how do we implement critical thinking in the language classroom? Hadley and Boone, 2023, I remember, I think you can recall the textbook published in 2023. Introduce stages to improve learners' critical thinking. For example, the first one, introduce a consciousness-raising activities aimed at helping students to develop a city or critical thinking disposition. In terms of receiving, learners should study how to listen or read thoughtfully, to understand what the other is saying in a respectful and curious manner. So it's not simply the use of blink, like thinking intuitively and fast. Yeah, it is okay, but in this case, people have to listen and read thoughtfully. So receiving can also be part of critical thinking that students and teachers can cultivate in the language classroom. Reasoning, thinking about the strengths of another person's argument and point out logical fallacies, misuse data, or other issues that may have been overlooked, and in terms of responding. So stages, developing the character of critical thinking in terms of receiving, in terms of reasoning, and then responding. Developing a city's disposition, some learning goals that can be integrated into the language curriculum, and especially in the context of Curriculum Merdeka or Emancipated Curriculum in Indonesia, teachers are supposed to have learning activities, and before they come up with learning activities, they are so-called tujuan pembelajaran or learning goals, and then alur tujuan pembelajaran or the flow chart or something. And I think Hadley and Boone provides an excellent framework for English teachers, especially in the Indonesian context, to formulate the learning goals or learning objectives that include critical thinking. In terms of developing disposition of critical thinking, teachers can raise learners' awareness about the need to check facts for reliability, raise learners' awareness about the need to support one's opinion, raise awareness of and challenge core beliefs, aware of and identify personal biases and assumptions, aware of and identify bias in news headlines. Now, in terms of receiving, some learning goals: raise learners' awareness about paying attention when listening. Raise learners' awareness of how much we actually hear and remember when listening to others. Raise awareness about positive body language to show that students are listening carefully to another speaker. Raise learners' awareness about positive nonverbal and verbal back-channeling techniques. Yes, I'm listening. That's back-channeling techniques that can be used to show that students are listening carefully to another speaker. Help learners focus on the message being communicated to them by another speaker. Raise learners' awareness about listening respectfully to other speakers. Demonstrate the potential negative impacts of interrupting other speakers. And Hadley and Boone provide lots of classroom activities. That's why I really encourage that your library purchase this textbook. Reasoning, yeah. Increase learner skills of categorizing information by critically comparing and contrasting data and recognizing links between it. Identify premises or supporting details and conclusions, like in writing for the media course that I'm teaching. The topic sentence, the thesis statements, yeah, those are the conclusion. Salatiga is the best city in the world. That's your opinion. That's your conclusion. So if in order to support your idea of Salatiga is the best, then what are your premises? What are your supporting details? Something like that. To listen for and evaluate the strength of other people's arguments, to convince others with logic and reason. Still about reasoning. Learning goals. Raise awareness about, listen for, and identify false, misleading, or unproven claims. Raise learners' consciousness about logical fallacies and sophistic strategies that can be used to distract and deceive. Yeah, Hadley and Boone 2023 give us a number of logical fallacies. I have no time to discuss one by one, but one of the interesting examples that I had when I had the session with a number of junior high school teachers in Salatiga, English teachers. This is one of the logical fallacies. Ad hominem. I'm focusing on ad hominem here, somewhere in the middle. Attacking a person rather than dealing with the facts or of the argument. And then the example that I read for the teachers attending my session, Professor Smith states that global warming is real, but don't listen to him. He cheated on his wife last year. Of course, with the Western way of thinking, yes, it's logical fallacy. Don't attack the person because you are not questioning the credibility of him as the global warming expert. Cheating on his wife has nothing to do with becoming a professor in global warming. Yeah, but one of the English teachers commented, well, but they might be related. Okay, I was kind of shocked, but yeah, that can be possible. Well, because maybe that's the Indonesian way of thinking of trying to make things that things are related somehow. Things cannot be compartmentalized. I'm trying to understand the teacher's point of view. So you see here, critical thinking from the perspective of the Western side and the Eastern, like the Indonesian people, can sometimes not easily reconcile. But anyway, that's one of the interesting points about introducing critical thinking, like logical fallacies, even for the language teachers, because for the language teacher that I had a conversation with, cheating on someone's wife might also have something to do with the lack of credibility of the person as an expert on everything. But yeah, anyway, I won't discuss too much on that. But yeah, you see, critical thinking can sometimes not necessarily harmoniously go hand in hand. Yeah, what we think is logical fallacy for somebody else, it's probably logical. And in fact, maybe some scholars like Kanagaraja recently has mentioned that the way people think critically in Eastern world or the Southern people in the Southern hemisphere like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh have different styles or different ways of expressing criticality. Well, I won't talk too much on that. Responding now, some learning goals. Listen carefully and restate the speaker's argument to show understanding. Engage in conversations that are critically aware, fair, and non-confrontational, to be able to correct mistakes and point out weak arguments made by others politely and diplomatically. Yeah, those are just the learning goals. But the activities, yeah, I would suggest that you read Hadley and Boone's textbook. Critical thinking can be nurtured through, and this is according to Yuan and Stapleton in ELT journal, interactive activities. For example, collaborative reading, followed by discussion and reflections, facilitated by scaffolding from teachers and more capable peers. For example, the use of flexible questioning techniques and appropriate content input. A recommendation in the ELT literature, critical pedagogy plus critical thinking. Again, this is noted by Yuan and Stapleton. citing Patek and Badir from Turkey. Language teacher educators can guide student teachers to engage in critical reading and conduct small-scale research projects on topics about equity and fairness in language education, so that they can gather, analyze, and synthesize information, as well as draw inferences, make recent arguments, and engage in information about their future students and teaching. And I give you an example of how I integrate this, remember, collaborative reading followed by discussion and reflections. And the power of asking questions is very important. Teachers questioning in the classroom is necessary. And this is from Sungging Wati and Nguyen, teachers questioning in reading lessons. And Pak Willy nicely sum up the research in the reading, or critical reading. And I think asking critical questions is necessary. Write their questions. Ask for explicit answers that stated in a passage. So if you have a text, then write their question. It's still okay to use write their questions. The answers are available in the text. Think and search. That's another category of question. Ask for answers found from different parts of a passage and making inferences. Author and me. Ask for answers from blended information in a passage, including reader's background knowledge and experience. So it's relating the text to the students. So it's personalizing the text, making meaning out of the text. On my own, as for personal responses, including experience, background knowledge, and judgment, that can still be related to the reading text being focused on. And I gave you an example of my previously published work and how I integrate sustainable development goals in my critical pedagogy and literacy class. And I gave the text on no poverty, why it matters. I provided the text. I downloaded from the United Nations website. And I also provide my worksheet with prompts. And you see here, the prompts, I write their questions like, I said, read the text, and then what is the struggle of around 11% of the world population? Well, the answers are there in the text. Write their question. You can come up with the right answer as far as you can read English. Number 2, mention one indicator. It's still right there, and think and search prompts. And as number 2, number 3, number 4 is more challenging. Number 5 is even more challenging. Paraphrase the statement. And number 6, as young people who might become English language teachers, what can you do to reduce poverty? And this is on my own question. As for personal responses, including experience, background knowledge, and judgment. So I designed the learning activities so they can practice different types of responding to critical questions in my class. And in fact, later in the semester, I asked my student teachers to develop learning activities where they integrate lots and HOTS thinking skills, lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills, starting from remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. You see here, these are the questions that are developed by my student teachers in my class. And I hope that they can practice that as they teach at school. They can make use of the learning activities that they design in my class in the undergrad program. Well, I have no time to discuss one by one, but you can just skim through it. And after all, the materials are available later at your disposal. Now, it's not simply about developing materials, but critical thinking can also be nurtured in the classroom discourse as students and teachers interact with each other. I'm citing the work of Khatib and Miri, published in Critical Inquiry in Language Studies. These are some of the take-home messages that we can learn from them. Because these are based on this is based on the research findings. Provide room for students to be equal partners of a dialogue by posing an open-ended question. See turns 1 and 5. You can have a look later at your spare time. Uttering, for example, plus extended waiting time. Sometimes teachers rush when asking questions. Give students time to process the question and respond to the teacher's question. And then utilize more referential questions instead of display questions. Display questions are the questions which require answers that the teachers already know. But if you ask referential questions, the teachers do not necessarily know the students, the answers. It's pretty open-ended. It's open in the sense that the teachers do not necessarily know the answers. It's up to the students to provide the answers, and intentionally give the floor to students. Don't speak all the time. Give time for the students to talk. Yeah, I would like to conclude my talk. Yeah, my finalized closing remarks. How it's still related to the question of how can we implement critical thinking in the language classroom? Critical thinking, is it to be offered as a standalone course or embedded in an existing course? It depends on your context. But according to Hadley and Boone, both scenarios are possible, and even they provide suggestions for both scenarios. If it is standalone course, how teachers should develop the standalone course on critical thinking. If it is embedded in an existing course, what can teachers do? Hadley and Boone provide suggestions for that. But according to Patek and Badir, and I think this is relevant, it is imperative for more enlightening ventures at pre-surface English teacher education that CT-based instruction is given as an embedded but explicit part of the curriculum in the pre-surface education program, so that they develop a sense and awareness of how to merge it with language teaching. For example, yes, I embed sustainable development goals into critical English language teaching and learning in my own undergrad class. But this is just one story, and the critical thinking story must go on, and you will fill in the story. I would like to see how people respond to my presentation, and would like to follow up research on critical thinking in the context of language classroom. I provide the 10 references that I cited in my presentation, and thank you.
All right.
Calvin. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Joseph. Yeah, actually, I'm looking at the time now. The time is almost out. So perhaps if I could ask each presenter to give us like final words to conclude this webinar. Dr. Willy Renandya, could you please give some final
Calvin,
words?
if people want to stay here a bit longer, like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I think they might want to ask questions.
Oh, okay.
I am happy to stay on until the end of the day.
Okay. All right then. Okay.
Yes.
So we can extend that. I see Henry Warman raising hands there. Henry, are you there? You can unmute yourself and.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello, Praveen.
Yes.
I think this is one of the.
I can't hear you.
There's some sort of noise. I cannot really listen to the voice clearly, but
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry, Pak Henry, we cannot hear you
try.
clearly. Perhaps you can just try to type your answer, questions in the chat
Try
box.
another person. Maybe a lady.
Yeah, Frida Martina, are you there? Frida Martina, are you there?
Try Bu Eka. I think Bu Eka has been
Okay,
raising
Bu
her,
Eka.
has been raising her hand since yesterday. Bu Eka,
Bu
come
Eka.
on, go ahead.
Bu Eka.
Bu Eka. Bu Eka Jember.
Maybe we can respond to Rams.
Okay, Gia, perhaps Gia, are you there?
Are they able to unmute themselves or not?
Okay, I'm here.
Yes. Okay,
Thank you so much for your presentation, and it is very informative and useful for me. and I am conducting a research into the teachers' perceptions and their opinions on critical thinking pedagogy. Because as I observed that students find it, not students, teachers, even both novice and experienced teachers find it really hard to apply critical thinking into language classrooms. So can you kindly suggest some empirical research or studies that investigate the teachers' voices about embedding or integrating critical thinking into language classroom, especially teaching skills like speaking and listening, reading. Yeah, thank you.
That's a question for Pak Joseph.
Okay, I think I will just share the screen again. You can take a screenshot, and after all, the committee will distribute the material, but hang on. This one. So you can trace some of the current literature on student teachers or undergrad teachers' perspectives on the use of critical thinking. Well, yeah, for example, which one? I remember Yuan and Stapleton, student teachers' perception of critical thinking and its teaching. According to Yuan and Stapleton, as far as I can remember, the student teachers or the undergrad students taking English language education cannot have did not have their understanding of critical thinking is still lacking but growing, as I said. But I think, yeah, the challenge for teaching critical thinking in different language skills like teaching reading, writing, speaking, listening are still very open to research. And even when I did my study here, my participants were undergrad students. I haven't had any chance to conduct research in junior high school or senior high school context. And actually, when I had a session with a number of junior high school English teachers in Salatiga, my city where I work, I think even though the Indonesian government has mandated that critical thinking is part of the lessons, including English, I think the teachers are still kind of lacking in their understanding of critical thinking in the light of the literature that I read so far, and they still struggle. Yeah, but I think it does. But as I said, it's difficult, but it was not impossible. One of the teachers that is in the session shared some of their experiences of integrating critical thinking in, for example, analyzing or digging out information about names of certain places in the city. We have a name like Blotongan in Salatiga, and the students are asked to interview people or the elders or the tokoh adat in Bahasa Indonesia, the elderly people or those who are in charge of a community, to tell them why the area is named Blotongan. And it turns out that the area in the past was full of feces of cows. That's why Teletong in Japanese means the faces of cows. That's one of the reasons why the area is named that. So it's one way of integrating critical thinking in a fun way when the students were asked to interview people in the community why a certain name is why a certain area is named that way. Yeah, that's a fun way of interviewing people in society where they can find answers. They sometimes take their locations for granted. Yeah. So it's important that they know. So on the one hand, it increases their understanding of the local wisdom, and on the other hand, they also practice questioning to the community. Yeah, that's one of the example that I can report from the teachers that I happen to meet in the session. I think Calvin was the chairperson of that meeting, in-house training for junior high school English teachers. So I had fun having a conversation with teachers when they reported how they integrated critical thinking.
All right.
Perhaps there was a question about what is the best way to teach critical thinking. I think in the context of ELT, English Language Education, one thing that we keep in mind is this. I think we are used to talking, we are used to teaching our students, and we don't actually provide opportunities, time for our students to actually do the thinking. That's why in recent years, people have been saying that maybe you should teach less. I think if we teach less and if we get the students to do some work, some important, interesting work, for example, doing a project. So project work, for example, is an excellent way for the students to actually go deeper into a topic. So the first thing in a project work is they have to read, and reading is a source of knowledge. And as I mentioned earlier on, with that knowledge, then the students can think more clearly and they can think more critically as well. Yeah. So what is the role of the teacher? The role of the teacher is to provide guidance, to provide things like, hey, please don't believe everything that they say, for example. I think that's a nice pointer for the students to think about. Hey, consider things from a different perspectives. That is a very useful tips for the students to learn. Hey, reflect on, assess your understanding, check with other people. These are useful things. But unless the students are actually doing it in the context of a meaningful project, today, what would be a meaningful project? Oh, the relationship about, between global warming and cheating maybe jobs. No, it's a bad example. But really something that is meaningful for the students, that they want to spend time, they want to actually spend days and hours collecting data, discussing, arguing. That is where we can build and nurture critical thinking. Plus, more importantly, people, I think we often think that critical thinking is our main job as a language teacher. No, it's not our only job. It's not the job of English teachers only. It's the job of the whole school, of the whole university. Anyone teaching a course in a university will have to be involved. We have to be doing it together. We can't do it alone. It's not just possible. So I'm a bit worried when English teachers start thinking that, well, it's my most important job to teach students to be able to think more critically. I don't think so. Our main job, first and foremost, is language education. Make sure that your students are able to develop a very high degree of literacy, L1 or L2, the first language or the second language. And then we can add, things about how to be more reflective, how to be more critical, how to be more evaluative in their thinking, in their dealing with certain issues, for example. So that'd be my take on what would be, one of the best ways to engage students in criticality.
Okay. Thank you so much,
I think
Dr.
that's
Renandia.
other questions. Yeah.
Okay. It seems that Christian really wants to ask something. Christian, are you there?
Yes, hello. It's me again. I just noticed that this whole webinar we've talked about critical thinking, but here in the Philippines, we don't have a subject or course about critical thinking. But in your own opinion, I guess, I'm going to ask experts, of course, with regards of critical thinking. Do you really think that critical thinking should be implemented in the curriculum?
Okay. Thank you, Christian, for the question. Yeah. I'll just move to the next person Farida.
Well, let me just address that
Oh,
very
okay.
quickly. Christian, the answer is yes. I think in most curriculums today, I think critical thinking is an important part of the goal of education. If you look at Singapore, for example, the most recent English language curriculum known as Syllabus 2020 has 3 main objectives, 3 main goals. The first one is communication. More specifically, we want our students in Singapore to be empathetic communicators. I think that word is very important, empathetic. It's not just about talking, you talking to people, but you talking in a way that makes sense, you talking in a way that is respectfully, acknowledging the contributions of other people, you understanding the emotional aspects of your, conversational partners and things like that. So it's not just talking, but empathetically, sympathetically talking to other people. So the emotional aspect is involved there. The second one is creativity. So some aspect of creativity is important. If we want to become better as a society, then creativity is one way to go. Without creativity, I don't think we can make progress in the future. And the last one is not really called critical thinking, but it's called discerning reading or discerning reader, which essentially is about reading more critically. I think that is very, very apt, if you ask me, because today we are just exposed to a huge amount of reading materials coming from all over the place. And this reading or text or information is unfiltered. They are not filtered. They're just available for the students to read. And that is something that we need to keep in mind. That's why discerning reading becomes very important. So our job is not just to teach text, but to also teach students to filter information, to access information, to filter information, and to also to evaluate the kind of information that the students find useful for their study, for their work, and for their life. So yes, quick answer is it has to be included. Criticality is important. The question of whether it is teachable or not teachable, I don't see a lot of evidence. I think we would like to think that things that we can teach is teachable. I think you look at grammar, for example. Grammar has been taught for like 1 million years. Is it teachable? Yes, it is teachable. Is it learnable? Big question. Yeah, the same thing with critical thinking. It's a very, very slippery concept. It is only recently that I understand more clearly that what we call critical thinking is not a transferable skill. Let me say this very slowly and very carefully. Critical thinking is not a transferable skill. It is domain specific. Let me say that again very carefully. It's domain specific. You need to have a lot of knowledge in one specific area in order for you to be able to think critically. Yeah. So I am critical when it comes to my field, but in other areas, I would like to think I'm critical, but actually I'm not that critical. Simply because it's not that I'm too lazy to think, but it's because I don't have enough information to draw that conclusion, to make that inferences. So very tricky and very slippery thing. Yeah. So that is something to think about.
Hopefully it answers your question, Christian. Okay, probably one last question, from Frida Martina. Frida, are you there?
Yeah, Bu Frida.
Yes, I'm here, sir. Thank you very much. I give question for Mr. Willy, and also Mr.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm an English teacher in senior high schools, and in our from Papua, in small city Papua, and in my school we have a science class, social class, and language class, and I teach in language class. In my language class, I call in out class. I mean that because the student in language class, they are very slowly in reading because they are still spell object, and then I agree they are also not have ability in literary L1 and L2. So it's big problem for me. And so far,
Yes.
my approach is teaching use technique in use a local language and sometimes in singing. And my question is, can you give a best way or exact formula for me? Something like that.
Yes.
No
Yes.
problem. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes. Let me invite a member of the audience, Bapak Romo Nani Songkares. Pak Romo, please share with Ibu Frida how you help your students develop literacy.
Sorry, sir, because in my place there also.
Yes, I understand. Romo Nani Songkares is from Flores.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So he may have the same issue as your students. Romo, do you want to share something that you have been doing?
Oh yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Willy and everybody. In my place, I even invite low-level students from junior high to start reading, to involve in extensive reading. And you cannot just ask the students to read. Usually I ask the students to come into my room in groups, and then we have kind of shared reading together. And this helps the students. For example, if I can read together with the students 4 or 5 books, and I notice that they can understand, seems that there's a motivation for them to read more.
Yeah.
And I experience even elementary school students in my place. I have a group of students in my town in Bajawa. Even elementary school students, they really like to read. In one family, because the family is the avid reader themselves. The mother and the father, they are avid reader, and they have specific hour to read together. Then their children really read. In Bajawa, for example, in 2 months, one child from elementary can read over 50 books.
Wow, that's very impressive. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a great model for other teachers teaching in other places in the world, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and other places, that reading is good. And the students will read if you give them opportunities to find the kind of reading materials that they want to read. The problem is very often we don't have the kind of materials that are enjoyable, that are easy for the students to read. Our reading materials are usually very high, difficult to understand. So reading will be the first step for you to, to get your students to develop their literacy. And once their literacy is high, and that is when we can, get in and start thinking about how we can, teach them to be more critical in their reading, to be more discerning, to be more evaluative, to be able to go beyond what is available in the text, not just reading what is in the text, but also reading what is not in the text. So going beyond what is presented by the author. Yes, Ibu Siana Indriani from UPH Jakarta. I think she also has a good question to ask.
Okay, Ibu, are you there?
Yes, but she is not able to unmute herself. Yes, there you go.
Yes, the organizer has unmute myself. Thank you. Yes, I think the phrase or the quote that Pak Willy just mentioned to all of us, I think it's very, very good. And it challenged also all of us as English language teachers to do our own stuff. I mean, to our own first, so that we can also motivate our learners to be more critical in all the texts that they are reading. But probably my question would be, Pak Willy and also the rest, other presenters, I think for Indonesian context, since we haven't had that habit since we were born, right? So we won't be able also to ask or demand our students to do the same thing, right? So especially in or for lower students who have low ability in English, then what would be the starting point, at least, especially for university students, since we do know that they're coming from different areas around Indonesia that have different social background, family background, and etc. So what do you think, Pak Willy? Probably. Thank you.
I think a good starting point, but Joseph probably will continue later on. A good starting point is for the students to be able to see things not just from one angle, but from different 2, maybe 3, or maybe 4 different perspectives. One small trick that you can try to use is to use the word switch. SWITCH, switch. For example, if the students are reading a story that happened in the US, for example, you can ask the students, hey, what if we switch the context? It's not happening in the US, but it's happening in Indonesia. Would the story be the same? Switch number 1. Switch number 2, maybe the main character is a male person. Can you switch the male character to a female character? Just thinking differently. If the main character is or was a female, would the plot have developed differently? Switch number 2. Switch number 3, social economic status. Maybe the main character is a very wealthy, a child from a wealthy family. Switch the social cultural background, by asking the students, if the child were born poor in Salatiga, for example, or in Blotongan, or whatever the place is, would he have thought differently? Would the story have resulted in a different ending? So it's a very simple thing like switch. Try to think differently. You remember that a piece of story, a piece of text is written for a specific purpose, in a specific culture, in a specific context, for a specific audience. That's the first thing that the students need to understand. The next part is for the students to play with it. Do all sort of things using a simple technique like switch, or change the title. If you change the title, do you think the story would have ended differently, for example? So that would be just some example. Daisy, perhaps you can continue, but Joseph, I think Pak Joseph has got a lot more experience teaching critical thinking. Go ahead, Pak Joseph.
Okay. I know it's even hard to be a critical thinker is hard, and to make others to be critical thinkers are even harder, I guess. But I agree with Pak Willy to switch the roles from a different point of view. Imagine yourself as blah blah blah. Regarding, I think your question, Ibu Siana, the difficulty of Indonesian students to think critically because we are not accustomed to doing it since we were in our childhood. I think as parents, as school teachers, we need to nurture, or we can cultivate being critical in a simple way, like Blotongan is one of the examples that I could think of. And also we need to be aware of the social economic status backgrounds. And I think Pak Willy has pointed that out. Better reading performance for those in the high socioeconomic status. The question is, what if our students come from lower or very low socioeconomic status? Can we still think critically? Can we still cultivate critical thinking to students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? It's still open to research, but my guess is that they can start from what they are, from what is available at their disposal, their own communities, the things around them, how they make sense of the materials that they have access, like different objects or different customs, or even the things or the habits that they can make sense of. We can start from what they have. We don't start from an ELT textbook published by English-speaking country. The learning materials come from their own community, and we can make use of the students' richness, the community's richness to make sense of the world. And in fact, from the perspective of Paulo Freire and critical thinking from Paulo Freire's point of view, there is an adage or a formula: read the word and the world. Yeah, we start from the world first, and then we make sense of the world through words that are digestible for the students in that particular context. Like I don't know, you come from a certain area of Kali Bening in Salatiga. What do they have? Cows or coconut trees, and you can start from, okay, this is a coconut tree, so it's real, the coconut tree is there. Can you think of the advantages of coconut tree? Yeah, how is coconut tree distributed to make our community wealthier, something like that. So you can start even from a small thing like the coconut tree in your environment and see from different angles of how the coconut tree can be beneficial for the community. And maybe even if from a socio-political perspective, what are some of the obstacles to make, what are some of the obstacles that avoid us from getting wealthier? We have plenty of coconut trees, but why is our community still poor? Something like that, if you want to push it from a more socio-political perspective. Yeah. So that's my personal take on the question. So we start from the simple things that we have at our disposal in our environment.
And another simple thing that we should all try to do starting tomorrow is stop asking students for the correct answers. I think we should stop doing that, because the moment you tell the students, I want the correct answer according to the text, then that's it. There's no way the students will, be willing to explore potentially different answers. If you allow thinking to flourish in the classroom, then we should allow diverse answers from the students and open it up in the classroom, give students access, to the internet, and let them find out answers from different sources and let them decide which of these answers are the most plausible. Yeah, bring ChatGPT into the classroom as well, so that they can discuss, they can challenge, they can, compare and contrast and do all these wonderful thinking things. So critical thinking essentially is about thinking, isn't it? Thinking in different ways. And if you teach in high school, I know this is not possible. The first thing you might want to suggest to your principal is to allow the students to not wear uniforms. Do you know why? Because the moment students are in uniform, they will have to think in unity, in a way that is acceptable to the school culture. There's one correct answer. Yeah, so flexibility is not allowed, creativity is not allowed, and thinking basically is not allowed as well. So there you go, Calvin, back to you.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, hopefully it answers your question, Ibu Siana. Perhaps this is one last question, from Jovan. This is for Dr. Daisy. Are students gesture and other body nouns directly proportional to their critical thinking skills, Dr. Daisy?
Actually, I'm not exactly clear on the question.
Yeah, Jovan, are you still there? Oh yeah. If you can ask your questions directly.
Hi, good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yeah,
yes.
Hi. Actually, I do have 3 questions for the 3 presenters. But I would like to raise my question first to Dr. Daisy. Thank you very much for that informative talk, Ma'am Daisy. With regard to the fluency or mastery of critical thinking skills, are students' gestures, because you talk about the gestures made by the students while they're presenting. I think I just want to be clarified or yeah, on that thing. Are students' gestures and other body nuances directly proportional to their critical thinking skills? What I mean here is if they do move more, are they not applying critical thinking skills? Or if they move less, are they really applying critical thinking skills? Yeah, that's my question. I hope it's clear.
The part about their observation is more of observing what they have done. But whether or not it's proportionate to their critical thinking skills would be the next question, which is why did you do that? Were you aware that you have done that? Why did you do that? Is that part of your design? Do you know what meaning that it gives when you do such a thing? So I'm not quite sure whether it's proportionate to critical thinking, but the observation is one thing, but the next step has got to be the asking of the question, why did they do this? What is the meaning behind doing such a thing? What is the meaning behind moving so much? Yeah.
Thank you. May I continue, Sir Calvin?
Yeah, perhaps one more question, Joven.
Okay. Yeah. So for Sir Mambu, Mambu, sorry. I am sorry. Let me read my question. Where's that? Here, I'll just read it. So with the increase of the percentage of those who have been victimized of misinformation and disinformation in my country, I'm from the Philippines, I do believe that mastering critical thinking skills is really important. So students should be made aware of the consequences or ramifications if they do not practice or apply critical thinking skills when they deal with people or information given to them. So my question, Sir Mambu, is how do you reconcile if students have different biases that could affect how they practice critical thinking skills in your language classroom? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Yeah, I think that's a tough question, but a very good question when people or students have different biases and the biases are hard to reconcile. Yeah,
well,
I would suggest
teach our students to agree to disagree. I mean,
yeah,
that's a
agree to
very
disagree, and I think to
important skill.
Give them the skills to be ethical in the sense to respect other people's opinions.
Exactly.
That's probably one of the easiest ways. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but at least I'm another lesson that I learned from Paul K. Matsuda, my supervisor, is that sometimes in a debate, people bring more heat than light. It is the purpose of the teacher's presence to make sure that we bring more light than heat. Easier said than done, yes, but the principle is there. So at least, agree to disagree. That's one thing from Willy. Another one, we need to respect those whom we disagree with.
Yeah, exactly. We disagree with the idea, the opinion, but we can still, become good friends with the person. There's nothing wrong with that.
And I think to provide more space for the students who disagree with each other to step back. They sometimes can think further and they might reconsider their bias. In due course, they might change, So, okay, give more time to think about it. Maybe there are some grains of truth that you can learn from the opposite point of view.
Yes, and also encourage your students to disagree with you, the teachers. I mean, that is something that is really, really very important. If you believe that critical thinking is important, you should open up that space that the students can disagree with you, but of course nicely, politely and everything, not disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing. Teachers, I don't like you, that's why I disagree with you, and that's not the point. Disagreeing is fine. My students disagree with me, and I'm happy with that. I'm not going to deduct, a lot of points, maybe some points, but not a lot of points.
Thank you so much, Professor Joseph and Dr. Renandia for the answers. Hopefully it answers your question, Joven. Okay, so I think,
maybe Calvin, one final point. I think some students or some of the members of the participants mentioned about metacognition. I think that is one word, one big word in education, metacognition. It's essentially what it means is it's understanding who we are, understanding the way we think. Meta means about thinking. Cognition is thinking. So it's very important for the students to be reflective. I think Daisy's presentation is about students reflecting on their performance, self-assessing their performance. All these things have to do with this big idea called metacognition, which in recent years has received a lot of attention. And a lot of people believe that metacognition is the way to go eventually. If you want your students to eventually become independent thinker, critical thinking people, then metacognition is the way to go. It won't help the students immediately, but over time, students will develop this idea of trying to understand, this is how I think. And the way I think now can be improved. And the way to improve that is to learn from books from other people, so that eventually I will be able to continue to grow in terms of my ability to assess, to understand, to think critically about something. And that is ultimately the goal of education, to, to develop in our students the ability to think for themselves, to reflect on their own thinking, and also to understand where they are in relation to where they want to be as, as a person, as a thinking person, eventually. So that will be the topic for another session. So Joseph, and Daisy and me will be giving another presentation, maybe next year.
Metacognition. Being reflexive, that's self-reflexivity. There's a concept with
absolutely, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Renandia, if we could invite you to give final words to conclude this webinar, Dr. Renandia.
Yeah, okay, 1 or 2 sentences. My understanding of critical thinking is that, yes, we have to teach, we have to value critical thinking, we have to nurture critical thinking. At the same time, we need to be aware. The research tells us that it is difficult to teach. Maybe that's not the right word. It's easy to teach, but it's difficult for the students to learn, to become critical. I think that is what the research is telling me. And one of the reasons is that critical thinking is domain specific. The word domain means very, very specific to what you know about a topic. So the more you know about topic, the easier it is for you to be able to think more critically. Yeah, the research also tells us that critical thinking is not transferable. Yeah, a chess player is considered, a good chess player is considered a very deep thinker. Yeah, do you think that chess players are critical in business communication, for example, or in education, or in other aspects of life? The answer is not necessarily. Most likely, no. So that is what we have learned from the literature on critical thinking, or on the nature of thinking in general. Maybe just one last point. I'm sorry, I keep on saying one last point. One last point is this. Yeah, there's a tendency. This is human nature. You cannot say no to this. Yeah, that we tend to think very fast. We think very quickly. It's not a bad thing or not a good thing. It's just the way things are. We think very quickly. We look at somebody and we make a decision right away. You meet Joseph and you form the impression right away, Joseph is a nice person. We do that all the time. Yeah. So what do we need to do? I think we need to slow down. We need to think more slowly. And reflection is about thinking more slowly. You cannot think very fast. If you think very fast, I think you will not be able to think critically. You will not be able to look at things from different or multiple perspectives. It's not possible. And critical thinking is very tiring, people. You get tired very quickly. It's seriously, it's very tiring. And we don't want to be tired. I mean, that's part of human nature. We want something fast and quick. Sorry, Joseph.
Okay.
Over to you.
Or Dr. Daisy first.
Okay, Dr. Daisy, final words.
Oh, you can say goodbye. That would be your final word.
Yeah, well, one of the dangers of critical thinking would be, I think, as what Dr. Willy was mentioning, we cannot enforce on our perspectives. We have to go in with an open mind. We cannot say you should do this, you should do that, but we just have to be open-minded that students can have those perspectives. Of course, we can guide them, but the danger is we make it very dictator-like. You must do this, you must do that. That's one danger that we need to take note of. But otherwise, on my end, I enjoyed today's session very much. I have benefited from this session myself, from Dr. Willy and Prof. Joseph. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor
My last
Joseph.
statement. Yeah, as teachers, we can be role models of critical thinkers, and we provide room for our students to practice from the role model or practice among the students themselves, and we facilitate. We provide scaffolding. We provide facilitation where they can achieve some sort of critical thinking abilities. And by becoming the role model, I am actually providing the critical thinking disposition or the character of critical thinking to my students. I know that I cannot be critical to anything, as Pa Willy mentioned. I can be critical in my own field, but at least there are some general sense that we can use critical thinking for a general sense, not necessarily in a very deep, thoughtful, and critical way, like if I master a particular piece of knowledge. Okay, with that, I think I'm really grateful to the presence of Pa Willy, Dr. Daisy, and everyone's company here. It's been a great moment for us to learn from each other and from the questions that you raised. I also thank Pa Calvin for moderating us, Bu Prof.D, who is with us since the very beginning. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much. And I believe the committee has shared the exit ticket in the chat box that you can access. And later on, we will send all the materials and also the recording of this webinar so that you can see the slides, learn, and replay the recording. Yeah. And Pak Willy, Dr. Daisy, and Professor Joseph, and everybody, could you please stay for one more minute? And because the committee asks me to ask you to give the group photo session. So everybody, could you please turn on your camera so that we can have the photo session together? And the committee, could you please help to take the picture? I think Pak Daniel or Ilona, yeah? Okay.
All right, everyone. We are still waiting for more people to turn on their cameras. I'll count 1, 2, 3 several times because we have several pages here. All right, give your best smile, everyone. 1, 2, and 3. All right, wait a second. Another page here. Again, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. One last time. Okay. 1, 2, and 3. Okay.
Great. Okay. That's it.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So on behalf of the Master's and Bachelor's program in English Language Education, Faculty of Language and Arts, Satya Wacana Christian University, Indonesia, we would like to express our gratitude once again to Dr. Willy Renandya, Dr. Daisy, and Dr. Joseph for your great and insightful presentation, and for all audience for your active participations. So I think this concludes our today's webinar. Thank you very much for all attending this webinar session, and we hope you have learned and enjoyed today's webinar session. And we'll see you next time. Terima kasih dan sampai jumpa lagi. Okay. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Willy.
Desi. Thank you, Pak
Thank
Willy.
Calvin.
Pak
Thank you,
Joseph.
Pak Willy.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank
Bra.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Prof. Joseph.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Dr.
Thank
Willy.
you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Pak
everyone.
Jos, Pak Calvin, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to try my slides again before you go.
Can you
Yeah,
stop the recording first? Can somebody?
Yes. No, for some